Minister of Netherlands, Mark Rutte, again an invitee nation. You would imagine that, being part of the European Union, Mark Rutte in Netherlands, all right, the Nigerian president has also just come in. So if you look at the list of invitee nations, India has really put thought into it. There are members from the global south. There are also members from the developed world, the Netherlands being a case of that. There are countries from the Indian Ocean region, whether it is Bangladesh, whether it is Mauritius. These are critical partners for India as India seeks to counter China's influence abroad. Bola Ahmed Tinubu is the president of Nigeria as he arrives at the Bharat Mandapam. And this is again critical because the Chinese have been making huge inroads, forays, as it were, into the African continent. Massive infrastructure projects that the Chinese have undertaken through One Belt, One Road in places like Ethiopia, in Tanzania. The Singapore Prime Minister, Lee Hsien Loong, is also now coming in because, again, Singapore is a hugely important global financial hub. Of course, a lot of startups are based out of Singapore, and it is, of course, a model city-state. One would argue, it is sort of set the standard and the benchmark, if you will, for cleanliness and things like that. So the Prime Minister of Singapore also being invited by the Prime Minister as a special invitee. Anand is there with us as well. So again, very, very thoughtful, the members of the countries that India has asked as special invitees to join the Delhi-hosted G20. Anand.
Yes, it is. You're mentioning the Netherlands, and I remember the trade ministers meeting in Jaipur. It was the trade ministers from the Netherlands and Oman, the youngest there. Although they are both not participants, they are invitee nations. They were the ones who were invited by Minister Piyush Goyal to cut the mooncake. Yes, sir. Even as the Italian Prime Minister has walked in, one by one the delegates will come in. What India has done is they have engaged with all the nations. You mentioned Egypt, you mentioned Al-Sisi, not just Republic Day, the June visit. Egypt is a very strong nation. It's got a voice in the Arab world. It's also got a voice among the Africa group of nations. And that's the reason why, after a long time, we had a visit of an Indian Prime Minister to Egypt. And that's why it was significant, because if the Africa group of nations need to come together, Egypt will be a strong voice, just like South Africa will be. And more than about 55 nations which are involved in the Africa Union. Whether or not they become permanent members this time around under India's chair, or is there a resolution to make them permanent members in the next year under Brazil, we'll have to wait and watch. But any movement in that direction will be very, very significant, big achievement for us. Nations who we have continuously engaged with, even within the European Union, there are certain nations which are very strong voices with whom we have engaged. Like you mentioned Mauritius, the importance in the Indo-Pacific. With each nation, India has been engaging at the G20. There are other strategic interests or dynamics that have come in. While we have pitched not just the digital infrastructure, UPI, and engaging with them and helping them set up their own digital economy and digital infrastructure, we've also helped them engage in health services. We have engaged with these emerging nations to partner with them as far as green growth and how to do sustainable development and how they can achieve the SDGs that have been set forth. The other thing I think we should keep an eye out on is the biofuel alliance. If India, US, and Brazil come together and announce the World Biofuel Alliance. Yes, Zaka.
Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, there being greeted by Prime Minister Modi. Italy is important because they're going to be the next host. So in that sense, the Troika is Indonesia, the previous host, India, the current host, and of course Italy being the next host. And these three countries have to come together to try and take the lead, to try and take the initiative, to try and finalize the joint declaration, because they have a stake. Indonesia has a stake in India having a successful G20. India has a stake, of course, in Italy having a successful G20. So the Troika, the previous president, the current president, and the next president are important ones. And now, of course, these are the members, the leader of the UAE now just walking in, the president of the UAE, the ruler of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, MBZ. He's just walked in. So these are now officially leaders of the G20. Italy, of course, being a founder member. The UAE is also now part of the G20, so they are now getting welcomed by the Prime Minister. And Prime Minister has had very, very deep personal ties with MBZ, the leader of Abu Dhabi, the leader of the UAE. In fact, Prime Minister has gone there multiple times. Even as recently as a few months ago, he was there on one of his return trips, spending just a few hours in the UAE. So clearly, the importance that Prime Minister has attached to countries like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, is extremely significant, because he realizes that not just because of the Indian diaspora there, but because of the dependence on oil from these countries, there has been a significant, almost dimensional change in the relationship between the UAE and New Delhi. And that is something that the Prime Minister is personally invested in as he shakes hands with the ruler of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, MBZ, as he's popularly known. So the UAE will also be a critical part of the G20. There are many of these countries, UAE, Saudi Arabia, these are countries which are part of G20, which may not want to take a position, let's say, for example, on the Russia-Ukraine war. And we were talking about the Italian Prime Minister a moment ago. The fear was that once she became Prime Minister in the elections where she got elected last year, the fear was that she might actually soften Europe's opposition to this war. This was certainly the concern in France, in Germany, some of the other European countries, because she represents a right of centre government. But that's not been the case. She has, in fact, taken just as strong a position against Vladimir Putin and Russia's aggression in Ukraine. And like I said, Italy is again important from the point of view that it is the next host of the G20. So the 2024 G20 Summit will be hosted by Italy. So the troika of the previous host, the current host and the next host are important. Their Sherpas are extremely important, because they have a stake in each other's success and in each other's ability to try and thrash out a joint statement. So now you will slowly, one by one, start seeing the leaders of the group of 19 plus the European Union leaders starting to arrive, and the Prime Minister will be greeting them one by one at this insignia which has been built there of the Sun Temple, the Wheel of Fortune, the Kala Chakra, which is of course found in the Sun Temple in Konark. Let me go back to Siddhant, Anand, Abhishek, my colleagues who are joining us, as we see more and more leaders now walking in. Pallavi is also there with us. Pallavi, just walk us through. Obviously, you know, all the focus is going to be on the joint declaration, but there will also be, in case there is no joint declaration, a chair summary and an outcome document. How hopeful are officials that that will be weighty enough to try and mitigate some of the attention, if at all a joint declaration is not possible?
Well, in fact, Zaka, yesterday there was a press conference in which India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant addressed it, and he wrapped it up by saying that a joint declaration is ready and it's now over to the bosses, which obviously is going to be now left to the delegates to thrash it out in the day-long meeting which takes place. There are contentions issues, there are differences of opinion. I mean, we know, for example, on the Rohingya issue, the Bali declaration did not take place. The only tricky point this time round is Russia and Ukraine. That is a matter of concern. The use of the word war, that is something which is emerging as a contentious point. So there is going to be either a tweaking on it or attempts being made completely to assure that some kind of a consensus takes place. But by and large, as far as the trade and economic policies are going, we've been talking about that, there seems to be a more or less consensus, and India has been very accommodative. That's also what we have been repeatedly told by way of government sources, that we are not going to be rigid. We do want, it matters really to India to come out with a joint declaration. That would be seen as a huge diplomatic success tomorrow. But apart from that, the fact is that India doesn't want to be rigid, will not be rigid. It wants to be more consensus-based, more accommodative, because that's exactly what the whole mantra of the G20 summit is all about. And therefore, on key trade economic policies, India certainly is very, very hopeful. At least they'll make its way into the a joint declaration. Zaka, these are tough times, and the backdrop is that sluggish economic growth in many countries. Some countries, even the development world, has been hit by recession, a post-COVID recovery. India has come up with a very buoyant kind of a green shooting of the economy, if I can say so. Huge GDP earnings, GST earnings have increased, UPI. We've shown the way to the world, whether it's the Moody's, whether it's the Pew surveys, all of them have given a huge thumbs up. So there's lots that India wants to show to the world in the joint declaration, or if any other statement comes out, the fact that we've been able to put cryptocurrency onto the agenda, and most probably there is going to be a consensus on that. Biofuel Global Alliance, we should not underestimate that. I have been told that over the last few days, particularly whole of yesterday, oil companies were involved in consultations with the top leadership of the delegates. That's going to be a huge push ahead and a big message coming in from India. So if these make their way through economic offences in terms of Biofuel Global Alliance and of course cryptocurrency regulatory mechanism, that will be seen as a huge success. That's how India wants to pass on the legacy of its presidency.
All right, you saw moments ago Raquel Sanchez, she's the Minister of Economy of Mexico. The Mexican president had said that he will not be able to make it in person for the G20 that Delhi is hosting. In fact, he's being represented by the economy minister. Again, Mexico, an emerging economy, has very deep ties with India. Both emerging economies, also export-driven nations in that sense, and clearly hoping to be the +1 in the China +1 strategy, as it were, just as India is hoping. You can take a whole host of countries from Vietnam to Indonesia to Mexico and India, of course, all of whom are hoping that some of the world supply chains, some of the global supply chains, which will eventually move away, a part of it will move away from China. They are hoping, these countries are hoping to be part of it and to try and gain the benefits of it, as we're now seeing one after another the members of the G20, the heads of government or the heads of state of the G20 member states now making their way one by one. You will soon see the Prime Minister of UK, the President of the United States, the leaders of Germany. A Saudi Arabian Crown Prince has just arrived under an hour ago. The Argentinian President has just made his way, I believe. I've just been told that he's just made his way to the Bharat Mandapam as he now walks down that red carpet. He will be received by the Prime Minister in front of that insignia of the Konark Temple. So Latin America, again, when India talks about being voice of the global South, how can you ignore Latin America? You are also seeing pictures of the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, walk in as well. And they, of course, again, have a very deep personal equation, Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Albanese. In fact, when Prime Minister was in Sydney just a few months ago, you saw that, as Prime Minister Albanese called it, a rock star reception, bigger than the one that even Bruce Springsteen got. In fact, at that time, Albanese had even come up with the moniker that Prime Minister Modi is the boss. So Anthony Albanese being received there by the Prime Minister as well. So clearly these are some of the most important, most powerful, most influential world leaders and people who have a stake in how the world's progress will carry forward over the next couple of years. Anthony Albanese, of course, sharing a very, very deep personal bond with the Prime Minister. Abhishek, in fact, when the Prime Minister was in Australia just a few months ago, you could see that equation, even though, you know, they belong from two different political formations. One is left of centre, the other is right of centre. So Anthony Albanese just being welcomed by the Prime Minister. Yeah, Abhishek, the importance of countries like Argentina, Australia. All right, Justin Trudeau of Canada has just walked in. India, of course, has a sort of a topsy-turvy relationship, if I will, with Canada because of the Khalistan issue, because of other issues that have come up. So, Abhishek, if you want to walk us through, you know, the Prime Minister of Australia and the Prime Minister of Canada now being welcomed by Prime Minister Modi.
Of course, they are far apart, but there is two issues that is contentious, and this is the Khalistan issue that we have seen both happening in Canada and Australia, and there has been two different sort of treatment also from both the sides, while Canadian authorities have not taken those issues with that much of seriousness that India would have liked. Australian Prime Minister had clearly outlined that the divisive politics or the freedom of expression does not allow any vandalism or violence, and the Australian government will take action on that. So that the kind of difference you could see in the relationship, also the kind of chemistry that you could see in the very welcoming of Prime Minister also, while Prime Minister did spend few moments talking to Anthony Albanese, the Australian Prime Minister. Justin Trudeau was welcome like a normal courteous call would be. So that is the kind of camaraderie, the personal chemistry Prime Minister has with certain leaders, and these few seconds that we are showing our viewers of the welcoming or the greetings that Prime Minister Modi is going to have, that clearly states the kind of the kind of relationship India has with a particular country or with a particular leader. We are now seeing European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. She is coming and she'll be also welcomed by Prime Minister Modi. We have seen India-EU free trade agreement talk happening in multiple rounds, and both the sides are eagerly looking forward to finalize the deal. Very soon. There are certain issues of mobility and then IPR, which are little uneasy. Both the sides are trying to negotiate on those issues.
Ursula von der Leyen has also just walked in. She's, of course, the head of the European Union. And, of course, the EU is a very, very critical member, and its criticality has assumed all that more significance right now because of the Ukraine war. And the EU has been at the forefront of the criticism against Russia. And aside of the individual EU member states, the EU itself as an organization has taken a very, very strong position against Russia and its aggression on Ukraine. Whether or not the EU will be able to temper down on some of the language in order to facilitate the joint statement from being achieved at the Delhi summit, at the Delhi G20 summit, and thereby the adoption of a New Delhi declaration, we'll have to wait and see. As Abhishek was mentioning, India and the European Union are also trying to negotiate an FTA. It is still very much in the nascent stages, as it were. It will take some time. It's some ways off before that FTA can be signed. But it's also important to underline that just as the EU chief and the leaders of Europe are being welcomed here in Delhi for the G20 summit, Rahul Gandhi, the opposition leader, will be addressing members of the European Parliament. So it's